I did not come to agriculture with land or lots of equipment or lots of assets. And so when you don't have a lot of assets to begin with, you really think outside the box. And really the neat thing about regenerative agriculture, as we're going to get into, is that the least amount of input you can add into that system, I think the more regenerative you can be.
As a consultant, I have the fortune of meeting many producers and their families and learning about their properties and businesses. No matter how many I continue to meet and consult with, I have yet to find two who are the same. All producers have different backgrounds, lifestyles, strengths, budgets, etc., and come with their own unique challenges, opportunities, and priorities. I, however, find consistency in probably 95% of agricultural producers, and that is in their goals. While the specifics differ from one property to the next, it all can usually be boiled down to these. 1, they want to be profitable, and 2, they want to leave the land better than they found it. I had the pleasure to sit down with Michael Vance, a beef cattle producer based in Gainesville, Texas. Michael started his operation from the ground up when he leased his first 160 acres and purchased 20 cows. He currently operates a successful Red Angus seed stock operation that runs between 600 to 1,000 head of cattle every year. Michael attributes his success to adopting a more regenerative approach to his operation more than 10 years ago. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in ranching and agriculture. Is that something that you came from, that you always wanted to do?
I was raised on a family row crop operation, but we also had cattle, and as many row crop operations do. But I did not enjoy the tractor time. I did not enjoy mechanicking, and so the cattle were always my passion. And so I followed that passion. It led me to working for some very innovative producers. I've been blessed with many good mentors and several really good bosses over time. I've got to work under some guys that are, I think, really cutting edge. And so, for me, coming into the cattle business, I was able to apply a little bit more outside the box approach. And something that's very interesting, I think, has kind of led me down the path of regenerative agriculture is, I did not come to agriculture with land or lots of equipment or lots of assets. And so when you don't have a lot of assets to begin with, you really think outside the box. And really the neat thing about regenerative agriculture, as we're going to get into, is that, the least amount of input you can add into that system, I think the more regenerative you can be, honestly.
So what made you take the direction of seed stock animals instead of going the more commercial route?
Over time, I realized to have a herd of animals that is really regenerative, or the type of genetics that I was looking for, that I thought would fit my environment, they were really hard to find. So I kind of fell into the seed stock business because of that. I, along with other producers that I was working with or working for, we were having trouble getting the kind of genetics that we were looking for. And also, we might even be able to find those genetics, but they weren't raised in an environment that was similar to ours. And that's the first key to any type of cattle operation, whether you're traditional or regenerative. You've got to find seed stock that'll fit your environment. And so that was a problem. And so the solution was to eventually we grew into our own business. That enterprise ended up growing for us.
So what are some of the challenges that you face as a producer from a profitability standpoint, from challenging norms?
I'd say the number one challenge is change. Anytime there's change, there's a learning curve. And so I think just about everybody I've watched that has maybe made a paradigm shift in the way they thought about their operation or the way they built their operation, they go through a learning curve, and that learning curve is going to hit you economically.
So it's part of the culture, right?
Yes, it is. And so, and that's probably the most challenging thing too, is when to change, when not to change. And maybe change is good, but how you do that, sometimes how you carry that out. Sometimes I think we want to see differences a lot faster than what are realistic from an economic standpoint. There's two factors at play. Let's say in the cattle business, you've got your cattle and you've got your land, and the challenge, there's a challenging side to both of those, because you're working with land that is not as good as it once was. No matter where you're at, most land has went backwards at some point. It does not have the macronutrients or the micronutrients that maybe it had 100 or 200 years ago. And then we're also working with an animal that, for the most part, most of our breeds and most of our cattle across the country have been bred for certain traits over the last 40 to 50 years that maybe aren't what you're looking for or from a priority standpoint. Maybe they're not the highest priority traits. Now that you've gone to more a low input regenerative model, and so you've got two things that are not perfect, and you're trying to mesh those two things together. So you're trying to get your cattle better at the same time you're getting land better. You're trying to use your cattle to make your land better, and you're trying to use your land to make your cattle better.
And you're trying to make money the whole time.
Yes, and so that is art. There, in my opinion, there are some producers that may struggle with regenerative ag because it's not a easy step-by-step approach that can be cast across all producers. Really, it's about you as an artist taking what you've been dealt, taking the resources that you have, and learning from those. Just like the weather, every year the weather's different. Winters are harder, winters are colder, warmer, wetter, and when you're dealing with an operation that's almost solely based on the grass you produce, to me, it's a lot more challenging, but it can also be a lot more rewarding whenever you do finally start seeing some of the successes that say we've seen in the last couple of years.
What were some of the traditional approaches that you saw that there were some issues with that you wanted to approach a different way?
So we used to use commercial fertilizer in a different application than we do now. And there's principles when it comes to applying fertilizers. There's different principles out there that we used to go by that now we've stepped back and we have completely different beliefs on those principles now. And we still use some commercial fertilizer in our operation currently. We would like to get away from it, but our thought process now is to use our cattle as our fertilizer machines. But you have to grow grass before they can produce fertilizer with that grass, and so we try to use that approach now. We know at some point our cattle are refertilizing our land. We try to use fertilizer to start that process, and then we also use fertilizer in a lot smaller increments. Like, for instance, we used to put out 100 pounds of fertilizer at a time minimum. Now we rarely put out more than 25 to 30 units of nitrogen at one time on an acre of ground. And a lot of people kind of laugh. I have people around here that when they ask me what I put out, I'll tell them I put out 25 or 30 units on my wheat, and they're like, is that even worth the cost of application? And what's interesting is when you have neighbors that are just across the fence that put 100 pounds out or 150 pounds, and there's no color difference in your wheat to theirs, is very interesting. And when they're growing at the same rate, or even when ours is growing a little bit, maybe it's growing a little bit slower. You look at the cost advantage, and there's years where we may not need that extra growth as compared to some years when we do, and so, but we have control of that, right? We're not completely dependent on 100 to 200 pounds of fertilizer in one application. Now we can apply 25 units, and maybe if we think we need some more, we can apply 25 units again, and the worst case scenario, we're out an extra application fee. And so, but it's neat. The neat thing about that is we were able to save money and also meet our goal of becoming more conscious of our soil at the same time. And we found that a lot in a lot of the different management tools that we have. It's almost like you have to completely relearn everything you were taught, and everything you have to look at it a little bit differently than you used to. And that's kind of scary, because you'll find out some of the things that you always did were completely backwards of the way you probably should be doing, or the way you think you're going to be doing them now. Some people will think you're crazy, and there's some things that you're going to do that you're going to find out don't work. But at least you tried them and you found out. And I think that's the key, is trying to apply things in your scenario or in your operation slowly, and really pay attention to them. And that way you can change before they make a huge economic impact. And so it's just one thing at a time. And then over time, the neat thing about the way we run cattle, in my opinion, the better you get at this, the more that you can see the cattle and the land telling you what to do. And so now we're artists. We're trying to read what the cattle are telling us and what the land's telling us to do. And it's a lot of the problems that we used to have within our operation. I'll use one example, is scours. And I'm going to say this: we're going to have quite a few heifers here pretty soon, so I hope this doesn't come back to bite me. But scours is nothing we don't deal with it at all. And I have people. It's
not an issue anymore.
Oh, non-issue. Like, I haven't doctored scours 5 years. But because our land is healthier and the way we manage them, the way they graze, they're constantly being moved and rotated. They're in healthier. They're in cleaner soils. Those calves aren't standing in their own manure for a long period of time. They're not standing in old, wet, mucky hay. the situation changes, and what's interesting is you just don't have many of those issues. And I believe that's the reason we don't have scours. Our cattle are constantly in cleaner, drier grass, and you just don't see a lot of the spread of like an E. coli scours that you might see in a muddy, hay type environment. And that may not be what's causing that, but that's just one instance. I can go through many different instances of different sickness that we've seen go away. And I mean, you'll still have animals that get sick, and bulls will still fight and try to break each other's legs and stuff like that. But for the most part, a lot of your issues, they just kind of go away over time. And I think that's one, the cattle building some immunity, but also two, you're creating a much healthier environment, and an environment that provides everything those animals need without human interaction.
Right.
And that's our number one goal. Our goal is to, I've told you this multiple times, there's nothing more efficient than a beef cow taking forage and turning it into protein without any human interaction, without us taking her a bale of hay or taking them a bucket of feed, because that all requires transportation, harvesting. What we want to see in our operation is we want to see them grazing a growing root and turning that into beef without us having to do anything. And in that system, we haven't gotten to a perfect system. I don't know that we ever will, but that's our standard.
Well, I think something like that you alluded to that's really important is that, some of these practices that are around, I think a lot of it's not the practices, it's the principles when it comes to, regenerative agriculture. And, we're going to have to work to, this didn't happen overnight, we're not going to fix it overnight.
Yeah.
It didn't happen in 6 months, you're not going to fix it in 6 months.
That's what's really interesting. I'll use another example in our part of the country is Bermuda grass. There's a lot of debate on Bermuda grass and fertilization and weed spray.
There's a lot of Bermuda grass.
And I've gone through, I have a love-hate relationship with Bermuda grass. It's a forage that comes on late for us. We're mostly a native operation, so it comes on late. So because it comes on late, it allows weeds to come in and do some suppression before the Bermuda grass really wakes up. So you have a weed control problem you always have to deal with Bermuda grass. And then, according to popular belief, it also needs nitrogen fertilization on a regular basis. But the neat thing about our system is proven, we've never fertilized Bermuda grass here, and we get great production out of it. Now, I'll say this is the good thing about Bermuda grass: you can overseed into it very easily. And so what we found, with overseeding to get maybe say early fall grazing or early winter grazing, we like to see a little bit of nitrogen put on that cool season grass while the Bermuda's dormant. And what we think happens, we are able to grow lots of forage with that little bit of nitrogen, and then those cattle recycle that forage, and then they put that nitrogen right back into the ground for the Bermuda grass to feed the Bermuda grass. And then on top of that, we're planting lots of legumes in with our wheat and oat base. And so we're seeing a legume come on that's not only a really good late season grazer, late spring grazer when a lot of your other cool season grasses are playing out, but they're also you can graze those legumes as they're dying and putting nitrogen right back into the ground for the Bermuda grass. And so like here now, we've seen our Bermuda grass coming on later, but it comes on stronger and a lot healthier because it's being fed by the manure and then also the nodulation from the legumes. Now that's art, right? Because you have to be careful. If you have a really good legume base, it can take over and it can completely suppress a Bermuda population. And so that's art, right? Like you have to be aware of it. Like, hey, we have a really good legume crop right now. Maybe you're late May, you need to get some cattle on that. And so with that, you really change your whole approach. With that being said, like in our operation, we like to put wheels under cattle a lot. And so if I have a place that I feel like needs to be hit hard for 30 or 45 days, I'll go get the cattle to do it and transport them there and drop them and use them. And that's some cost. But what I found is it's cheaper to haul cattle than it is to haul feed. And it's like, and once you drop cattle in growing grass, there's not much else you have to do. If you're having to haul feed, it's a daily or every other day routine. Right. And so when your goals change and things you want to do, your principles change a little bit. You just, over time you realize some things you can do, and you're like, I would hate to haul cattle as much as I do now. But now it's just a daily routine. We move cattle a lot. You might get a little lease on the other side of town, I'll just let it grow up, you know, and then when I put cattle on it, I put a bunch of cattle on it. You know, the other neat thing, you know, part of that, you know, when you're rotating with big groups like we do, you know, I usually have cattle in about a quarter of our pastures at one time. And there's some people, I have neighbors that have cattle in every pasture, and that's 4 times as many animals, you know, groups to check. I mean, it takes the same time to check 150 head in one group as it does 50. And so there is you know, it can be scary, some of the things you worry about from a profitability standpoint, but there's also some major pluses. I mean, it's all offsetting. You're going to find balance with regenerative practices. You just got to be aware of those and catch on to them. That way, you can take advantage of those either, you know, profit, you know, opportunities, or just opportunities to cut cost.
So what would you say to somebody who might have some reservations about taking this new approach? Someone who may be nervous about that, and some of these challenges that you've talked about, you know, what would you say to somebody who's considering it but is hesitant?
I would say spend a lot of time visiting with other producers, and don't step your feet way off in the water until you have some confidence, and do everything slowly. You know, there's no reason to jump in anything quick. There is reason to be concerned because you can make mistakes that can economically impact you. And so I would spend lots of time with people with wisdom, and not people that may be real excited about regenerative ag and have a few cows or a few goats or a few sheep. Spend some time with people that have made their living in this business and that have made some of these changes. Find an operator that was more traditional, and then, you know, switch to more regenerative principles. And I think they can really help with your learning curve. They can save you. You know, I know if somebody visits with me, I can save them some money on some of the mistakes that I made. Just like any type of approach to agriculture, there's some things out there that maybe aren't true, or maybe just aren't applicable to all circumstances, and, you know, you've got to filter the information you come across. But the more information you have, the more those things will become very apparent.
Michael's journey is not far from many others that have decided to make the transition to regenerative ranching. We have listed some great information and next steps for you in the description below. We would love to know what challenges you may be facing on your property, so leave us a comment below. And if you found this video helpful, give it a like. If you like videos like this one and our others, consider subscribing and hit the notification bell to get notifications as we release more videos in the future. Thanks for watching.